Hello and welcome, everyone. I am so excited today on this new episode of Voices of Peace, Global Voices of Peace, because today I have a special guest with us today, all the way from Canada. Mr. Thierry Beriault is a commercial mediator, a very successful commercial mediator. And I'm going to read a couple of sentences of a bio, but I'm going to request him to introduce himself as well. So, Mr. Beriault is a distinguished fellow with International Academy of Mediators, where I happen to belong to as well. He's a chartered mediator of ADR Institute of Canada and a lawyer. And since 2005, he has conducted more than 900 mediations to resolve disputes occurring in both private and public sector. He regularly mediates in complex matters, including multi-party matters. And I know he has done work both at a relational and political level, and not just locally, including in Canada, but work in Europe as well. So I have seen that he's a specialist in mediation process. And I know he teaches at conflict prevention and resolution at University de Sherbrooke in Canada, as well as in Paris. And he can tell you more about himself, but I'm super interested to call this today's podcast, the question of language. And the question in my mind that I want to start with is, does the language change the style of mediation? My friend is fluent in French as well as English and can speak a third language as well. So together, he and I speak 6 or 7 languages, I think. Today, we're going to record in English for a wider audience, if that's okay with you all. I'm going to start with welcoming you. Welcome. How are you, my friend? How are you, Mr. Beriault?
Well, I'm very good. Thank you very much for the invite. And I'm thrilled as well to have a conversation with you today, Suk, and also thrilled to be able to share some of my thoughts with your audience. Thank you very much.
Amazing. I am so pleased to hear that and so happy. Why don't you fill in the blank? Anything you want to add to the brief bio I did of yours? How would you like?
Well, I think you did a pretty good job. I'm indeed focus of my mediations now are in commercial matters.
Mhm.
You pinpointed that I'm a specialist of the mediation processes, and my expertise is more in files and matters where relationships present in the conflict between the parties,
Mhm.
and that they need to solve it because they want to continue that relationship. So I'm really focusing on that, but I'm doing as well some workplace mediations. Still doing that. This is my background. I used to be a labor relations lawyer. So I'm still doing some of these, but as you said, mostly in multi-party processes now in the workplace. And I'm also one area of expertise that I've developed in the last few years is designing and implementing DPR systems within
Mhm.
organization, be it at the commercial level or organizational level.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. Mr. Bahari, I'm going to start with asking you what brought you to the field of mediation?
Well, like a lot of people who are doing their studies in law, one of the I think one of the main value and shared value is justice. And
Mhm.
that concept that law or the practice of law would be bringing you somebody, an agent, that will be able to get people, parties, to obtain that justice. And after almost 15 years of practice as a lawyer, and I was a labor lawyer, as I mentioned before, I did both the union side and then the employer side at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I came to the conclusion that my needs and my values around justice were not met as a practicing lawyer. And that really started within me
Mhm.
a discussion where I was looking for, okay, but if I cannot find it as a practicing lawyer, where could I find that?
I love that. I love that. I think it's almost like this. So you're saying the identity of a mediator is perhaps different than the identity of a lawyer, and you were transitioning between those identities. Am I right there?
Yes, transitioning. I think I really believe that, you cannot be generalizing too much, but
Mm.
most lawyers are a natural fit for mediation. And I think that because of those values, the aim at which we are trying to get at as lawyer, it's only that the system is what I call in my words suboptimal to reach that. And there's other processes and mediation I found, and that was back in, you have to remember, this is more than 20 years ago. Mediation was there, but it evolved a lot. But at the time, mediation was almost solely the only process, formal process, formal being structured process that could lead you to that. And I really like that. I experienced it as a lawyer. And while I took a bit of a break from doing lawyer stuff, I was a negotiator ultimately on the employer side. That's where I really got to experience real-time mediation with mediators. And that's where I found my identity being quite similar to the identity of the mediators that were acting in some of the files I was doing, trying to negotiate a settlement.
Do you, however, think that, so you think the value stays the same between you being a lawyer or a negotiator versus lawyer, versus being a impartial slash mediator? How do you see the worldview or the attitude of one's perspective changing, if at all, or staying the same between those two roles?
I think that I did not envision saying that the identity is the same with the specific part where we need to be impartial as mediator. I mean, as a lawyer, I was not impartial. I was partial to
Mhm.
my clients, and that's one thing that I did not like as much. I thought at the time, that's way back 30, 25 years ago, that in fact, the fact that I needed to be partial was conflicting with justice,
Mm,
trying to
mm,
reach the real justice, the justice for my client, the justice for the other person. But justice is a concept where it's cooperative, it's all encompassing. I think I would tend to answer your question as being, well, on the contrary, I think that I needed to change my mindset. I would say the mindset, the values, the identity is not different
mm,
fundamentally,
mm,
but my mindset, what we
mm.
call in French la posture, I think in English you call this posture,
Posture,
it's
yes.
quite different, right?
Mm,
Because
mm.
you're in the middle of
Beautiful,
it and you're
beautiful.
not trying to convince anyone. And
Mm.
we'll come to that later, but
Yeah,
we're not there to convince anyone to get to that set of solutions as
I
lawyers
like
are
that.
doing. Yeah.
I love that. You change posture towards the other. You know, speaking of this idea of change, we're discussing so far change within oneself as moving from being a lawyer or a judge to being a mediator, and the change in posture or attitude versus values. Love that. How about change in others? Do you see the change as we all mediators do in bringing, sometimes we call it transformative change. I was just in prison system here in San Francisco 2 days ago, volunteering my time to teach mediation to prisoners up in San Quentin Rehab Center. It was a it was a beautiful day for me because I saw the power of mediation in such a unique setting where people who have no other freedom, they are stuck inside a wall, four walls, with so many rules. They have to wear just like blue clothes. Now you can't even wear different color clothing. And they are mediating their own conflicts, the conflicts between themselves and staff, and the conflict between staff members, being incarcerated men in this case. And I saw the vision. I mean, I saw, wow. I mean, if mediation can work in this setting, right?
Of
It was
course.
beautiful. What
Yeah.
are your comments on that?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you
Thank you.
that because who you are and your experience and the way you're doing mediations, you were able in that case to achieve the result you've just summarized. I mean, I truly believe and I think I feel what you feel. I don't know, we're thousands of kilometers away, but I think I feel what you feel because I feel it sometimes.
Yeah.
My only I'm only sorry that we cannot achieve that in every mediation because this
Mm,
is really great and it's
mhm,
about transformation. You're
mm,
right. I totally agree. But it's more than transformation. Now we're getting
mm,
into
mm,
how mediation can allow parties to self-actualize humanity. I think
mm,
that's more than transformation. I agree with the transformation part. To answer the more global question you ask, before, well, not before, but very, very early in my practice as a mediator, I took the decision to sacrifice time and money, obviously, to enter into a LLM program in DPR, in dispute prevention and resolution. And one of the reasons I entered it is linked to your question or your comments. It's about transformation. And I didn't feel equipped as a lawyer, right, to enter in this profession and even use my experience and who I am without some high level theory, concepts, and research. And I think that that program I taught, and I'm happy to say I think I achieved that, being in that program with those great professors, teachers, and practitioners helped me understand. And now that's the part, the link with the transformative approach or the approach is, we know there's almost 30 approaches to mediation. And, in North America, we practice maybe 4 to 6 of them. And one of them is the transformative mediation model. I was happy and very interested in following that training as well. I did follow that training. And so the LLM program helped me to really get deep into all of those approaches and understand something about transformation. So I wouldn't qualify, that's my belief, right? Okay. And it's not my practice, but I do believe that if a mediator main objective in a mediation would be to try to get people to transform,
Mhm.
right? As being the aim of the mediation. I think there's a lot of issues into being able to keep his or her impartiality, right? I do believe that mediation processes have a potential to transform people, but my practice is to take the risk to have a higher sense of empowerment from the parties.
Mm,
So they could decide if they want to transform or not. And I'm more
mm,
focusing in my practice into the needs of the people. Transformative approach would look into needs and other approaches with needs and interest. But my approach is more focused on the needs. And I believe that in a lot of my mediation, people do transform. I think they do not transform within my mediation process, but they do transform after the fact because
mm.
they've learned, they've self-reflect.
Ooh, would love that.
And that's my perspective on it. I'm just positioning myself as a mediator somewhere. Yeah,
Can I
go.
take this in a spiritual lens for a second, just to
Yeah,
make
yeah,
it
yeah.
very, very interesting, right?
Mhm,
So I'm learning, I'm a Sikh by faith, and I'm learning. I love learning what other faiths, and
mhm,
you know, I noticed that a lot of faiths teach us this idea of power, right? This
mhm,
who has the power, right? Do you have the power, right? In my faith, we say you don't control literally anything, right? So leave the illusion of control.
mhm,
And
yeah,
and and what you're saying is something very similar in mediation setting. I like it. You're saying
mhm, mhm,
you don't control the process, the parties do. Give them the
mhm,
power. Let them decide whether they want the process to be
mhm,
transformative or not. Am
mhm.
I am I getting this right?
Yeah, and this is the hard part, Suk, because you're hired. And most of the time, I don't say every time, but most of the time you're paid for your services, right? You're a mediator.
Yes. Yes.
And so on the surface, not deep down, but on the surface, why are they calling you? It's to get an agreement. But I don't think that's what they need. I think getting an agreement is the easiest part of all.
Mhm.
The hardest part of it is coming to what you were saying is although I have a power as a mediator and I see the parties not getting to an agreement, and in French, I will say in English, but it's like getting down to your knees in the mud and not being able to advance. It's having the courage as a mediator not to intervene, but to keep the pressure for dialogue and having them take all the strength they want to put to this case and try to get out of the mud. And so this is a illustration, an image, but what I'm saying here is really empowerment. It's let them decide what they want to do. And most of the time, Suk, I don't think it's a reality to say, well, if the mediator is not taking control, they won't get an agreement. I'm convinced that the mediator that exercises too much power on the mediation, I'm convinced that mediator will have agreements, will produce agreements for the parties. But I'm also convinced that most of the time, that agreement will lack the quality and the solidity of an agreement where a mediator did not intervene, just putting in place the process, making sure there's good communication, and having, as you said at the beginning, a design that will be purposive to the mediation or the case or the problems that are at task in the mediation.
So when you interact with California-based or U.S. commercial
Yeah.
mediators, do you
Yes.
see any difference in the way, without naming anybody, do you see the difference in the way they may approach the process and the way you're approaching it?
Well, I think it's a fact, and it's not only me. You've mentioned the International Academy of Mediators. You're part of this. I'm part of this. I mean, it's the top, or less than 300 mediators around the world, and it's the top mediators in the world, commercial mediators in the world. And it's obvious that some of the jurisdictions. Some people will call them markets, but let's say jurisdiction. Jurisdiction in French meaning regions, right? Like Southern California or California as a whole, um, have practices in mediation where there's big differences. And I won't enter into the causes of that because it's might be a bit sensitive. But I think what I want to say about that, not about California, but what are we as mediators?
Mm.
I think mediators are officers of justice.
Mm.
And we've got a very, very important role in our societies. And the way the processes are designed and the aim of the design, of course, it needs to meet the expectations of the parties and the ones who are advising them. But you have to be very careful. We've seen that around the world in a few of those regions
Yeah.
where the way mediation is practiced is only taking into account mainly the needs and interests of some of the stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, it's not necessarily the parties. And the parties will listen to some of those stakeholders, but those stakeholders are not expert in mediation. They are
Mm.
not who we are. We are the ones as mediator, as a surgeon will do if he needs to get some surgery in a patient. It's not the patient who will say to the surgeon how to act. It's going to surgeon gets going to ask the party or his patient or her patient explain what's the procedure,
Mm.
and if the patient doesn't want it, you just have to say, well, I don't want that kind of procedure,
You
right?
don't do it.
And so maybe I want to be too vague in my example, but I wanted to illustrate the challenges or some of the problems, and those mediators that are within these regions are often talking, and you might have heard that in the IM and elsewhere, the old days, the old days when we could do the mediation how as they should have been done, but they're not capable of doing it. That's a challenge, and in the new region and in those countries where mediation is not developed, I think mediators should be very careful to make sure that they do invest themselves in developing the processes and
Mm.
keep them in equilibrium towards the expectation of all the stakeholders, not only part of the stakeholders or some of the stakeholders.
Love that. No, and I want to say we were having a little fun there, but I have some truly esteemed colleagues who are terrific mediators here in California. So there's no generalization, as you said. My clarification is there might be one or two who will think of the word transformation. That may not be the very first word that comes to their mind when they think of mediation. It may be driven also by the culture of the market, which is also driven by attorneys and many times and the specific industry practice. For example, labor is different than employment, is different than commercial, and different can be different than construction, different than environment, different than cross culture, cross border. So thank you for that clarification and gentleness on your answer. Let's continue this discussion of culture. We were discussing jurisdictional differences, and you also do some work in Europe, and you do work in the French-speaking part of Canada, and you're fluent in the language. To what extent do you include culture in your design when you're designing the process? And how do you, if I may ask a two-pronged question, and how do you think about mediating in French versus in English? Is there a difference in how you approach it? Or is it same principles and you apply them and see how it evolves?
Well, that's a very good question. I think I must say that obviously in the design, in the early steps of the design, culture, in terms of language, let's see, because we have to define culture, right? We've spoken about that, Suk, in another conversation about what is culture, and people, you could define it as very, very narrow, as ethnically or religiously, but for me, if when somebody voice to me culture, I see it as all of the aspects of a culture, right? I've named language, ethnicity, the region where I come from in the world. It might be the country, although I think there's subcultures in every countries, but countries, and but there's also the culture of your family, the culture of your town, the culture of if you work in the public sector or the private sector, the culture of what kind of profession are you doing. So all of these aspects of culture, I think that any mediators that is practicing extensively would tell you the same thing than me. And probably you will tell me the same thing. That you need to take it into account. Um, Now, specifically, if we're talking about, because I'm doing a lot of these, that's one of my main area of practice is those files where French and English needs to be included in the mediation, be it because, they're people that are French and English, or businesses that are from France or Belgium or Quebec and in Canada. And so there's something that I was always interested in, is that as a very small boy, I learned English by myself. I had English at school,
Wow.
and one of the reasons why I was really interested by English, it's the preciseness and directness of the language, which permeate to the culture and the way you do business and you negotiate and everything. So that I really like it. But if you put somebody from the French background with somebody with the English background, there's often, let's not generalize too much, but often a really big gap between two. For example, we say, and I think it's true from my experience, that French has so many ways of expressing an idea, and it's a lot of subtlety. And
Mm,
that's why we say that French is the language of diplomacy.
mm,
As in English, there's subtlety, there's use of words, but it's not, to my experience, not the same level of it, right? And so, how do you, if and when I have those files where I have a French business, for example, and let's say a US business or a English Canadian business, how do you make sure that each of the representative parties would understand each other and will not misinterpret moves in the negotiation, moves in the discussion, and ways of doing it, right? So that's where I could see it. One thing that is quite important is that I reflected on that, Suk, and I reflected a good 10 years, right? I mean, starting my practice in mediation, 2005. And I was always interested in, I've mentioned humanity before.
mm, mm,
And to what extent are you taking into account the characteristics of the parties, right?
mm.
It's not only the cultural characteristic, there's other personal characteristic, intrapersonal and stuff like this. And how, what is the space as a mediator you're going to give to those specifics of each of the parties? And my thinking is that you need to take it into account, but not too much, because you
Mm.
might lose the efficiency of the process where
Yes.
you want to get humans together, right?
Beautiful.
Humans together.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
I love that. So let me try to summarize if I'm getting you right. I think I will, but the flexibility built into the process should also be honored, besides understanding and giving due diligence to the backgrounds of the parties.
Yes. And let people realize that no matter what are our differences, we are humans. And when they communicate in a mediation, if we are doing a good job as mediator, it's not those differences that will be stemming out, right? What will be stemming out is the verbal, nonverbal, that communication that goes much more further than any words they can pronounce. And that's the meeting of those humans. I don't think I will ever finish that thinking that I need to do about culture, right? But right now, I'm putting less emphasis on that. Yeah.
Loving that. And I love how careful you are when you talk about culture. You use the word, let's not generalize. You say, in my opinion, you say sometimes, or you're very careful with those framing. And that's very important. I mentioned that in my forthcoming book on cross-cultural intelligence. That's exactly what I say is we have to be culturally fluent. And to be fluent, we need to know that there is no one culture, and not everyone belonging to a culture have the same culture. We have to respect those differences, yet know that there may not be differences, or there may be too many differences. We don't know.
Exactly. So that's what I was going to say. I mean, if as a mediator, I'm too convinced of what I think, well, this is contrary to what we're leading people to do in a mediation, because in my world, my perspective, there's no truth.
Love that. Yes.
There's no truth. And
Yeah.
so if you're too dogmatic, you need to show them the example. And you need, as a mediator, to be the first one to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I said something that I was convinced, but it was totally wrong or it was completely false because it doesn't match up. And I call it take the hit, right? As a mediator and show them that if they're in conflict and if they want to solve their conflict, they need to understand that each of them, two, three, four, five, didn't have the truth. And they acted as if they had the truth. And then they got into trouble, into those conflicts. And let's try to redo the thing and let's try to have a common understanding of those differences and those things that we think that it's the truth. It's my knowledge. Knowledge is influenced by all sort of things.
I'm learning. Are you saying that the parties should arrive at their own truth through the strength of the process of mediation? Or would you be open to telling them at some point, you're wrong, your perspective is wrong? Can I get that clarity from you?
I cannot say never, but I don't think that in those 900 plus mediations since the last 20 years, I ever said to anyone as a mediator that they were right or wrong. I want to say it.
I like
I
that. Thank
want
you.
to say it,
You want to
but
say,
I say it at home at night
yeah,
when I'm
yeah,
really sometimes upset
yes,
about what I've seen,
yes,
about things. But I strongly believe, and again, I might be, and I'm no, it's my style of mediation. There's other styles, but I've never done that. I'm not saying that. I think that if I'm doing that because I'm a neutral, I'm impartial, I could have real power on the parties
yeah,
because I'm in the middle. So if I'm saying they're wrong, they might not always, and I've seen that when I was a lawyer from mediators telling me that you get influenced by that. And so, if you're doing those pure transactional mediation, business mediation, the contract didn't go well. There's 2, 3, 4, 20 million at stake. There's, court proceedings going on. And, the companies just want to settle on money or settle the dispute. Yeah. We have colleagues that are specialists and very, very good at this. And we know that they're what we call the evaluative approach to mediation or distributive approach to mediation. That's what they're doing. And that's what the parties want because they don't want to work on the relationship. They don't want to work on the communication. They basically just want to have, an amount at the end of the day. So
yeah.
they could you you leave those procedures and go forward. And so yeah, but that's not what
That's
you've said it. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not practicing transactional mediation only if I'm asked sometimes. But even to those clients, I'm saying that, I'm not very good at it. Why do you want to have me do the mediation? Because I'm not that good at it. But so when they insist, sometimes I do them.
let's talk about that.
It's a challenge for me. So
Yeah, no, it's great. I love that. Love the discussion. Thank you for being honest and open with us, candid with us. Let's move to listening. We both have passion to talk about listening. We work across cultures. I love to talk about listening from around the world, how we listen differently. But when you listen to parties in your mediation, are you trying to listen to the different value systems? Let's say you listen to someone in English versus listen to someone in French in the same mediation. I'm sure you have mediations where you have one party
yeah.
as French speaking, one as English speaking. Guide us. Tell us what are you listening to because listening must be a part of your big success as a mediator. If I'm assuming that right.
My listening is two level. I strongly believe that the first thing that the parties or the mediator should be doing, allowing the parties, is to at last have a real dialogue, right? The dialogue can be short sometimes, it can be long, it depends of the parties. How far do they want to go in the dialogue to settle whatever they want to settle at the mediation process? But so my two levels I'm looking at is I'm the one who designed the process, and they've agreed that they will be dialoguing because I vetted with them that my design with them, and so I call it the humming of peace, right? So it's not really the words. It's the structure of the communication I'm really attentive to. And is the structure of that conversation plus some technicality like respectful language, trying to active listening and things like this that, coaching and some techniques that you would give to the parties. Are they following the design in that very specific part? So that I would be looking at it. Are they allowing the other party to discuss, to give their opinion, their idea? So, like kind of that first level of communication. But mainly what I'm doing is I would agree with the word value, but because of my specific technique or the way I develop my practice, I would rather talk about needs, right? And what I'm really trying to understand is above or under those words, when somebody says, I want this, or I've been hurt by this, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that this all emotions and things, okay, that's okay. But under it, all of it, what is the need that is expressed?
Mhm.
And really what I'm doing in my notebook, which I don't take a lot of notes. I don't take the verbatim, but I would be taking what I think are the needs of the parties.
Mhm.
Because I believe that if I can get the parties to understand their needs and then to craft solutions not on what they want, but on those needs that can be common together or individual needs, it doesn't matter. We'll get to a point where we're going to have the best possible agreement that they could have reached in the process. And so that's where what I'm doing a lot of listening.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you. Listening to the field of change, where are we headed? Theory, are we headed towards the dark age where human beings won't mediate in future? Are we
Mhm.
headed where we will use AI as a technology in mediation that we already are using to some extent and include that as a friend? Are you worried at all of all these technological interventions in our very human to human process of conversation and mediation?
That's a another very, very good question. So
I need to elevate my questions to be with you, so that's I'm trying.
I gave a lecture on AI maybe a year ago in fact in Southern California, where I was telling my colleagues, my esteemed colleagues, mediators, that I think we should not be fearing that new technology. I
Mm,
think that the new technology, you named it, AI, could be of great help to the mediation processes.
mm,
I didn't figure it all yet, and I will never probably because the machine is so powerful. So I don't know what it's going to do. But in a way, I've started to think about now. I'm using it now to the BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, make some simulation. I'm testing my designs. Right. I think one thing that I would say is I would be fearful that people use AI as the first option, the first tool, right?
mm,
I
mm.
think I
Hear
think you
you.
should be thinking with your brain,
Mhm,
use your experience, and then if relevant, run it through AI. And I'm running my design just to get the opinion of a machine. And sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree. And when I'm not using a machine, sometimes I made mixed mistake in my design, and sometimes it's good. And same thing with the machine. So I think we should be using it. I think we should be transparent with the parties.
mhm,
I think we should be saying to them, I've been using that. And my line of questions right now is that I ran a simulation on BATNA maybe in between two sessions, and it came up with interesting questions. It might be, I think they're relevant, but what do you think about them? So I think, and also I reflected with my colleagues that, we've been using all of those team members, right? And sometimes young practitioner to help us in our practice. So there's a debate around, are we going to get work out of those young practitioners? So I understand this is a social debate, but technically within the mediation process, I mean, basically what AI is doing is replicating answers that are not always the best ones, but still based on a huge important data sets that will be informing their answer or the answer of the AI. So now I'm not somebody fearful in life. I think that we need to embrace it. I that's my opinion again, and I'm not a specialist, but I don't think AI will disappear. I think it's there to stay. So we need to embrace it and use it safely, work with governments and work with mediators association to make sure that we use it safely and that it's safe for the parties as much as possible. And the wider, I don't know what's the answer, Suk, about how will AI influence humans at the end of it? I think AI could certainly take part of the work on transactional mediations. I mean, it already started 15, 20 years ago, for example, in Vancouver, where there's there's some the first form of AI used to all of those city infractions, like not penal, not criminal, parking tickets and all that. I mean, there's machine to do that, and I think that might be the case, but it will give us more time as mediators to work with those cases and those situations where the machine, unless you say to the machine, decide everything and do everything. I mean, there's humans that are actually taking the decision and having to be getting to an agreement when there's gap into what they think or what they want.
Let's not be fearful of what the technology can do to us, but let's be mindful of what we can do with the technology.
Well, you said it better than me, so it's
I'm
beautiful.
summarizing you. Maybe last question. I know we both have a busy day today. I would want to end by asking you a question about future. How about, let's imagine, I don't know, 20 years from today, 25 years from today, 30 years from today, what would you want to be known by and why?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, I would like to be remembered. I think, firstly, by my family and friends as a good person. I really believe in life that good person is something that we should be always aiming. I've made mistake. I'm still making mistakes. I'm not always the best, but aiming to be up 20 years ago, or yeah, to be a good person, a good mediator, if we extend that to mediation, because your question, I'm sure, is about mediation. So a good person. And I'd like to be involved in global conflicts. That's a dream. I don't know if I'm going to get there someday, but more than just doing mediation with parties, but getting uh, the trust of states and people to try, with my experience, my own views on conflict resolution, trying to make a difference. I'm not naive, it's not one mediator. There's no one mediator that could solve things. But if I could make a contribution to that, and try to develop, I think there's a field not really well developed right now. I mean, we've got science, discipline around diplomatic negotiations, but and we've got great mediators that are acting on the international scene. We know that, and there's some very famous in the US that are, every month are doing their job around the world because they're sent to do it. And those people are really admire them. But still, I think that we could, as mediators, and you're a teacher, I'm a teacher as well, try to develop that field so we can bring into diplomacy and not only the R of dispute prevention and resolution, but the P, the prevention, and try to get all of what we know and we've learned and what we believe in and our values as mediators to that field, and not to have diplomacy negotiation be like what we think or what our values, but to cross those two knowledge and find a solution, which is very hard. How do you get states and the decision maker of states to really mediate? I'm not sure there was ever a state-to-state mediation. Maybe a conciliation, maybe a negotiation they call mediation. So anyhow, so that's it's very, I didn't think that much about it, but
Thank you. No, I love that. And I particularly loved the beautiful word you use. I want to be known as a good person. I think at the end of the day, that was we as mediators try to do. We just try to do good, try to help people, try to do good. And we try to bring that to our lives too, isn't it? We try to bring it home as much as we can. And I really love that. And I wish your words about global conflict and your participation and our fellow mediators' participation in those conflicts become absolutely true. It's so much needed. And we can see people who are trying to be mediators and people who are not qualified to be mediators at global stages. So I think your words are so true. Thank you for that amazing interview, podcast, meeting with me. I've learned so much, and I want to tell our audience, if you're listening and you want to hear more, you want to learn more, especially, and this is not the end of it. This is the beginning, and I want to encourage you to attend. There's an opportunity. You can attend Mr. Thierry's in-person training with me in San Francisco on September 2nd, 2026 at the San Francisco Bar Association. We'll be co-training new mediators in a 40-hour mediation workshop. And I'm very excited to have you there with me. I think it'll be a terrific day for us in that 1-week program. So thank you for your time today, for all the wisdom and what you bring to the world.
Thank you, Sukh, and looking forward to continue our conversation outside of the podcast. And I hope it's going to be useful for your listeners to
Absolutely.
get a
I have no doubt
perspective.
about it. Thank you so much.